Welcome back to another episode of The Conversation. I am Onjalé Scott Price, and I am joined by my wonderful, illustrious, fantastic co-host, the Reverend Will Mebane. Yeah, that's you. I am so excited about today's show because today we're going to be talking about something that is very near and dear to my heart. Actually, what brought me to Falmouth in the first place, talking about diversity in STEM. So STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And as we know, STEM is really important to our community here in Falmouth specifically. It's really important to our global economy. It's important to just everyone. Science, technology, engineering, math, arguably is the basis of a lot of things that we do. And yet the STEM fields are not necessarily very diverse racially, gender-wise. The women are starting to add more to STEM careers, but still not nearly as dominated as men. And so what we're going to talk about today is diversity and STEM. So I'm really excited to get started, and we will go to our people on the street with our first question of, why isn't there more diversity in the STEM fields? So let's hear what they have to say and get started in this really interesting conversation.
STEM, like most other disciplines, has historically been a white man's field, and in many ways it still is. If we look at the numbers, with current and recent research showing that white people are earning PhDs in STEM at orders of magnitudes higher or greater than underrepresented groups. However, with current conversations, it appears to be moving in the right direction, where we're discussing more on how to be anti-racist and starting to address these facts and these numbers on how to improve diversity in the field. But for me, I think it really depends on time. Time will tell whether these conversations are followed up by action. And I think right now the issue is more of a matter of relinquishment of power. For centuries, white people have been sitting comfortably at the top of the field, and now they must face the fact that they must share their power, their work, their science, with those who have historically been at the bottom.
I feel like in STEM, education kind of remains stratified by race, and POCs are always at the bottom of like this weird hierarchy chain in the education system. And it's very hard to find opportunities. A lot of times I felt like I was being overlooked. A lot of times I felt like my male counterparts were getting the opportunities that I knew that I can do. And it also felt like I had to, again, prove myself that I was worthy of a position in science. And the greater the challenges we face, the harder it was to want to stay in that realm. A ton of historical practice have negatively affected POC students, including a lack of critical mass of STEM barriers in our departments. So yes, we had the racial and ethnic stereotyping. Yes, we had institutional barriers. And I kept witnessing a lot of my peers get out of STEM. It became something that, while it was their dreams, it was no longer for them.
Welcome back. We have just heard from our people on the street answering the question, why isn't there more diversity in the STEM fields? And while I could jump right into this and just take over the whole conversation, I'm not going to do that today. I'm very excited about the panelists that we have with us today. And so I'd like to start by introducing Catalina Martinez, a very old friend of mine. I know, Catalina, you work as the regional program manager for NOAA Ocean Exploration in Rhode Island, and you've been with NOAA for over 20 years. But the capacity that I know you in is really, really pushing for DEI in STEM and really supporting the underrepresented students in STEM. And so I'm very excited to have you here with us. And I'd like to pass it over to you to either respond to the people on the streets or to answer the question yourself of, why isn't there more diversity in the STEM fields?
Well, Angie, thank you so much. And, back at you for all the work you do in this realm as well as the other esteemed colleagues we have on today. So excited to be here. I think that those two lovely individuals you spoke with, those two young folk who are in the trenches right now, we know that the structure and function of the academic world, of the federal agencies who encompass, so much of the STEM spaces. The legacy is not pretty, right? The legacy is of, racism, anti-Blackness. The structure and function of it was created by and for the dominant culture through extraction, harm-inducing, practices. And it's operating not that different today, right? And it's operating as intended, which is there's lots of filters. And so what you and I and Ambrose and others work on a lot is really trying to mitigate those barriers to entry, the barriers to finding, success and persistence in these spaces. So even if you can get there, do you feel like you belong? And do you have any potential for advancement and persistence in that space, right? So the structure and function of these spaces, to me, continues to operate as it was intended, which is keeping us out, in very simple terms.
You're absolutely right. I often hear people say, well, these systems, they're not working, they're broken. Well, actually, these systems are functioning very well. They're functioning exactly as they were intended to. And that's why we have to do things differently if we want things to change. It's because
absolutely,
we keep doing the same thing, expecting different results. Someone once said that that's the definition of insanity.
Yes.
And that is why we're still here with the same issues, because we keep doing the same things. Yeah. Dr. J, I'd like to pass it over to you, or Ambrose. It's still hard for me to just call him Ambrose. He's always been Dr. Jearld to me. Dr. Jearld retired of NOAA Fisheries, started as a fisheries biologist, worked his way up, and ended his career as the director of academic programs, but definitely not the end of a career, just the end of the career at NOAA. But Dr. Jearld is still very involved with us at PEP and still a champion for DEI and STEM. So I'm really glad to have you as part of this conversation, Dr. J.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to ask if you want to comment on anything that Catalina has said, or if you'd like to answer the question, why isn't there more diversity in the STEM fields?
Well, first I'd like to say, just for someone who may not know, that NOAA stands for the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration.
Thank you.
So that's the organization that Catalina and I've worked for and have retired from. And it's all around the country as far as the National Marine Fisheries Service is one of the services within NOAA. And there are other services like the Weather Service that probably most people may have heard of. And then there's NESNIS, which handles the national satellite data and what have you. And so we obviously do not have time in this setting to address that question adequately. And so where Catalina has started is right on cue from my point of view. However, I would add that why there isn't more diversity in the STEM fields has a historical context. And that context starts with the Western world denying that Africa was the place and cradle of civilization. In the sense that before the Greeks, before the Romans, there were the Egyptians, there were the Nubians, and there were how many centuries before the Greek, in quote, philosophers that we hear about today showed up to learn from the libraries and from those who had already pushed forward everything from what is God, who is God, how do we know that, and then what and how does God reside in us and we in God, you see. And so way back, I think it was Asa Hilliard, and I cannot recall the other author, wrote a book, published a book, Stolen Legacy, And that had to do with trying to set the stage for Western science and for the world about how the contributions of Africa and African people being an intelligent people, a learned, a brilliant people. The whole world since then has been about, in many ways, negating that, telling us that Africa and people of African descent and people with dark skin are not intelligent, and that civilization started with the Greeks and the Romans, and then the Europeans picked it up much later in many ways. That is the rest of Europe, so to say, as we know it today. So I would say we are still living that legacy. And here in the United States, we're dealing with the legacy of slavery and slaves not being able to have an education or to be educated, to even, to contribute their knowledge. But in addition to the slave, the free Black was not allowed to have an education. And every time they tried to educate themselves or build a system of education, violent groups of whites attacked them. And that violence from whites continues today. And they are that element of whites that practice psychological violence, physical violence, social violence. They act as a proxy for the learned, for the educated, for the genteel, for the gentlemen, for the ladies that do not have to do that, but it's done in their name and with their complicity, you see. And that violence is still meted out on Black people today, and brown people, and non-white people. That violence is meted out in the sense that we still have people who know how to behave in many ways in a social setting, but their behavior is structured and designed to make sure that boys and girls that look like you and me and Will and Catalina and everyone on this, and all of us on this Zoom session, do not have open access to a quality education. We are still robbing our children of a quality education before first grade, before kindergarten. And then we play the game at the level of the academy, higher education. We can't find any, or they don't have the skills, or they don't have this. But they have sat there and protected the system and benefited from the system and advantaged by the system. And so those of us in the workplace, like Noah, also contribute to the individuals from Black and brown populations from getting an adequate education or access to experiences. And the government, our government, has participated and continues to participate in discrimination, in structural systems, and have structures in place that those leaders that have the big paying jobs and opposed to have led us through this a long time ago are never and never have been held accountable. And they still are not held accountable. So I'll stop right there because, as I said, we don't have time to really adequately address this question, but maybe we should pick up where Catalina brought us in terms of what we're doing right now.
Ooh. You're absolutely right. We really don't have enough time. We are just going to be scratching the surface of this today. But I thank you for all of your thoughts, Dr. Jade. And it makes me think of a lot of different things. And I'm thinking about what Monét said about people of color not feeling they belong in STEM. And that really goes back to a lot of what you just said, Dr. J, is that the systems are not built for people of color to belong and to feel comfortable. And it makes it that much more difficult when you don't have the education and you don't have the structural support to be able to be successful in STEM. And, another thing that you mentioned was people saying they can't find qualified people of color for STEM. And that is one thing that really grinds my gears, because people don't look. You ask them, well, okay, you can't find these people, where are you looking? And they're looking in the same places they've always been looking, where they haven't gotten these people before. It's like, well, again, you're doing the same thing. You're perpetuating the same systems that you say are not working, but you're not trying any systems that might work or proven systems that do work. And so part of why there's not as much diversity in STEM is because the people who hold that power don't want more diversity in STEM. They're not actively engaging the groups of people that would diversify STEM. Okay, yeah. Let me pass it off to Reverend Will before I keep going. Reverend Will, what are your thoughts on what's been discussed so far?
No, I wanted you to keep going. Amen. So this is your area, Anji, and I was so glad when we decided to do the show on this, because I knew you would be fired up and raring to go, and you are. And so I want you to get as much airtime during this show as you want. But as I was listening to Catalina and Dr. J, I'm going to start calling him Dr. J.
Fun, right?
I like that. First of all, thank you for explaining to our audience and to me what NOAA is. I thought those were the weather folks. Now you're talking about fishing and other stuff, and okay. So I appreciate that education. One of the things I was thinking about, since that's a governmental agency, right? And I was like, okay, so it's a governmental agency. Certainly, this governmental agency would not be committed to continuing to perpetuate a racist system that would exclude people of color. So perhaps it's unfair, but I'm certainly not surprised when I hear that a commercial enterprise, a for-profit entity, is discriminating against folks or denying opportunity to people of color. But as I was listening to you, I was thinking, well, this is happening in the government as well. So I guess my question to Catalina and to you, Ambrose, is, I think I know the answer, but I want to hear what you have to say. Why?
Dr. J, do you want me to start us off? I mean, there's so much to unpack there, right?
Sure, Catalina.
So much to unpack there.
Let's, I'm retired now. I don't think they'll take my check back. And you are still in the fight, and you're still working. And I know from experience that one has to be sagacious and take that into consideration, because you have to work with people and you want to get things done. So there may be things I can say that you can't say.
Absolutely.
Or at least at this time wouldn't be wise for you to maybe be as forceful on.
No, you are absolutely right. And, in a federal space, you have a workforce, right? So we have the challenges and barriers of all workforces in terms of diversifying them. But also we, provide support to other institutions, agencies, groups, individuals to do this work. A lot of what NOAA does is granting, right? They have grants, they have opportunities, they create these, centers of excellence, cooperative institutes, cooperative science centers, things like that, right? So there's a lot that goes into a federal agency supporting a STEM enterprise. And there are issues, challenges, barriers, and opportunities in each one of those spaces. And you hear the metaphor often, and I'm guilty of using it myself in the past, the leaky pipeline, and that you know that you're losing people from diverse backgrounds, the further and further you move through the academic system, the further and further you move up in the workforce and leadership ranks, right? In all of these arenas, in the power structure, in those with influence, leadership, power to make decisions, they're less and less diverse and completely not diverse at the top, right? So that leaky pipeline metaphor is so flawed because it assumes a passive system is losing us, that we're falling out of the system. They use the terms that like we're falling through the cracks. We know that's not true. And so what is so important, I think, is, finally, some of our colleagues just published a very powerful paper that replaces that metaphor with a hostile obstacle course, because we know that there are systemic and individual, obstacles to our not only entry into these systems, but persistence, advancement, and success. And they're complicated because in a lot of ways, they're not perceived as problems by the dominant culture because they're created by and for them. So you're not going to see something as basic as, say, an application requirement that is 2 letters of recommendation from a professor by the time, say, you're a sophomore in college. You're not going to see that as a problem if you come from the cultural capital, the networks, the political capital, the structure and function of a dominant culture, family of means. You don't see that as a barrier, right? But somebody, from my particular background, I mean, by the time I was a sophomore, I was probably in my late 20s. I was working full time. I barely make relationships with my professors because I'm too busy doing other things. Yeah, I can get the grade, but I got to go to work and I'm taking care of my family or whatever it is. So I don't have that traditional, college experience. I didn't get to embrace that academic, ivory tower, maybe the way that my dominant culture peers had. So when I see something like that, it's a red flag for me as a barrier to entry for us. So there's so many complicated challenges like that need to be reimagined, but you can't reimagine something you don't understand. You have to have the right people at the table for co-creation as we reimagine the structure and function of these institutions, these spaces, these entry points, these advancement potential opportunities, the high value opportunities, right? And we have to help our next generation get to positions of leadership, influence, power, because that's going to be the shift in the culture that's needed for this reimagining really to occur, I believe, in large scale.
Wait a minute. So we had a black man that was the head of the government. What you talking about? We got to wait to get more people in. He was the pipe. He was at the end of the pipe. He was. I know I'm.
How lucky we were. I mean, how lucky we were to have the Obamas there for 8 years. My goodness. And I'll tell you right now, with the Biden-Harris administration, doors are being flung wide open that I did not see even under Obama. Okay, so we had the Trump era. We know what happened during that time period, and that we are experiencing the legacy of that now globally. But right now, our current administration, they have, I don't even know how many, dozens and dozens of executive orders that come out of the White House with a laser focus on justice and equity in ways I don't think anyone has ever really put on paper, right? So not only is this administration speaking the way we need them to speak, but they are holding all their federal spaces accountable. So there are accountability measures, not only for diversity, but equity, inclusion, and justice, which means leveling the playing field, doing equity assessments, and being accountable to those mandates. So it's a very different environment right now. It could be a very narrow window of opportunity. So we continuously have to keep having these conversations, doing the work and pushing, as Ambrose, pointed out, in subversive ways, maybe, but we have to continue to do this work because the opportunity is on the table right now.
Yeah, and I would say that if I had to bet, I would pick up on what you say here, Catalina, that it's a window of opportunity. But if another regime comes in after this one, we go back to business as usual. And even under this administration and what is going on in the government, in education, in business, you name it, we still have leadership that's in power, was in power before this government, this party or whatever, however you want to put it, and they will be there after. And they are the gatekeepers. They are the ones who maintain the structural system that is where equity is not obvious, isn't practiced necessarily, where discrimination continues to go on. And it goes on quietly, you see. And that is the momentum, the undercurrent, the current that we are still, as what's his name puts in his book, swimming against, you see. And that is what is so insidious from my point of view. We have the government, for example, if we just deal with an institute, outfit like NOAA, and you have hiring authorities that get to make the personal decision of who is hired and who isn't, or who gets a promotion and who does not get a promotion. And so far, while we have the executive orders that can come down, we still have those individuals sitting there waiting out the system, you see, and not participating and continuing to cause the drag. And that is what, and we reward them. They do not get punished. They are not moved out of the way. They are simply, what is the word I'm looking for? They're accepted, you see. And there is no expectation out of them and no accountability. So they use the old carts. You know, we can't find any. I don't know any. Or give me some more training. Or let's talk about implicit bias. Or let's talk about personal interests around the subject of DEI and what have you. But let's not touch the system, the structure that is there long after an individual has been and left the system, you see. And that is what we're dealing with from my point of view. You know, I started with NOAA in 1977. And quite frankly, NOAA is no more diverse in terms of the numbers, percentage-wise. Today, as a matter of fact, it's probably less than it was over a good portion of my tenure with NOAA. And that's because we have clever leaders who are able to keep the heat off of themselves and have no accountability for carrying out any of the strategic plans or any of the executive orders, other than know how to cover their behind at the time and support each other through memos, what have you, and make it look like they're doing something clean by the same time they're still dirty, you see. Mm-hmm. And that's where I contend that is the area that keeps us from diversifying. Because Anji, you, me, our network, our tentacles, so to say, we know that there are people out there with the potential, with the credentials, with the credibility to work for NOAA and places like NOAA. But we do not have the hiring authority to hire those people. It's left up to those people who've used everything they can in the toolbox to say, you're not quite good enough, or we have somebody else in mind that we think would do a better job for us.
And, to piggyback on that, Dr. Jearld, that along with what Catalina said about, not being good enough or not having the necessary skills, it really goes back to how are we quantifying, qualifying, expecting excellence? I'm going to brag a little bit about PEP here, the Woods Hole Partnership Education Program, which is what I originally came to Woods Hole to do. Dr. Jearld is one of the co-founders of that, and Catalina has been a huge supporter from the beginning, is we don't look at the standard metrics of success or metrics of excellence. We don't look at, we look at everything, but we don't have minimum GPA scores because they don't tell the whole story. We've had students who have less than a stellar GPA, but you look at their application and they work 40 hours a week. If you're getting C's and working 40 hours a week, that's pretty awesome, because a lot of people get C's and that's all they do is just get C's, and we've had students who only had one letter of recommendation because they only made one connection in college, but that letter of recommendation was strong. On multiple occasions, Dr. Jearld and I have called people and asked about the students that they're recommending, because we think there might be something about them that wasn't quite conveyed in the application or in their letters of recommendation. And we end up with excellent students. Our students go on and do really excellent work. And it's because we take the time to look beyond the standard metrics and look beyond the systems that are in place that normally keep us out. And we're able to bring those students in and support them and watch them flourish in their careers. And people often say, man, that sounds like a lot of work. It is a lot of work. We spend weeks and weeks looking at these applications and calling people and reviewing and discussing. But that's what we have to do if we're going to break down these barriers. These systems have been in place for a very long time, and they are very solid structures. And so if we want to break them down, we have to put in a lot of work. We can't be passive. The leaky pipeline has been used, I feel like my whole career, I've heard it so many times, but I'm glad that we are actually thinking about the words that we use and how we discuss these issues, because people don't just fall out of the pipeline like leaky water. People are pushed out. People are made to feel unwelcome and unworthy. And the phrase that I hear so often is, oh, we don't want to sacrifice excellence for diversity, as if those things are mutually exclusive. But those are the kinds of things that are said to people, and that is portrayed in the way people are spoken to and the way people just interact with each other, is that, yeah, well, you're the diversity hire, or you're only here to check a box. We are not getting an excellent person because we're getting you instead, when that's not true. But when that is perpetuated and continually discussed, like, that wears on a person. And that, in context of these systems, these structures that are in place to do the same thing, it's not a leaky pipeline. People are being pushed out. And so I want to read that paper that you're talking about, Catalina, because I'd really like to read how we are changing the way that we talk about this, so that it goes from this is passive actions to what it really is, which is these are constructed and active actions that we need to fix.
And who gets to decide, like you said right from the beginning, what is excellence? Who decides, what the criteria are to become a leader? Who decides what the qualities are of a top scientist? That's all a construct of the dominant culture that perpetuates themselves. So again, unless we're ready to dismantle what's been in place all this time, including mindsets and value systems, valuing one way of learning, valuing one way of knowing, valuing these dominant culture rubrics and systems and structures, unless we're willing to start to dismantle some of that and reimagine it, and the structure and function and the individuals who get to make decisions, right, sharing power, then I don't see how we make a dent, and everything that you all have said is absolutely, it's just the reality that we all face, and which is why we continue to do this work. And of course, it takes more effort and resources to reach people you're not reaching. And that's often where it falls right off the table. And what people come to us with often, I'm sure you all get this too, is recruitment practices.
Mhm.
Okay, yes, you need to have strategic recruitment practices. It has to be done. That goes without saying. It cannot begin and end with recruitment. If you're not creating an equitable, just system where everybody can feel they belong, you're not going to have the persistence, the advancement potential, any of that. So, you can't just begin and end everything with getting a few of us through the door.
Yeah, and I would add too that, and I know we can move on from this, but we think of things like pipeline language. Well, in a way, to me, that's limiting. And I ask myself the question, so if you're talking about a pipeline pipeline from what to where and for who? Are you talking about a pipeline when you're talking about people of color? Is there a pipeline for white folks also? Or is everybody in the pipe? And so if it's leaking, where's the leak? Who's leaking out of it? And who's staying in? These terms we use, again, is part of the psychological violence, you see.
Absolutely.
It's meted out on people of color. And it's used by those who are outright in your face abusive. And it's used by those who want you to think, well, no, I would never think that way. You see? So my thing is that is why do we, why is there not more diversity? It's this psychological violence is part of it, you see. And then the other is, from my point of view, again, time is not on our side, or to even think it through and tease it out, is I contend that we've spent too much time focusing on the victim and victimizing the victim. And when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, welcoming, fairness, social justice, race, racism, structural, systemic, we always find ourselves enabling whites to escape because of their fragility to talk about these issues, you see. And we always find a way to continue to focus the discussion and the approach or the emphasis on people of color, the victim. We've studied us to death, you see. We are hyper studied, you see. Where are the studies on white people and what they have done to affect this system and to benefit from it and to have the advantage in it? Where's the spotlight on them in terms of people relations, human relations, in terms of decency, in terms of fairness? We're in a system right now where we're moving from where we, through the civil rights era and through equal opportunity, EO, affirmative action, came into diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now we talk about welcoming and social justice. And I think if we did the numbers, ran the study, we might find that we are finding fewer and fewer, relatively speaking, people of color who are in positions heading up diversity offices, diversity efforts, equity, welcoming efforts. So I think we have to ask the question also, if we want to solve the problem, are the people who have created the problem going to solve it for us by being in control and in charge? Who rocks the cradle spoils the child. And so we see an appreciable advancement of white women We also see an appreciable advancement of white women, part of diversity, equity, and inclusion and social justice efforts. Well, they should be, because they've been discriminated against. But what is the healthy balance? And where are Black women, brown women, Latino women, Asian women leading the way, who have the natural affinity for their culture, for their group? So there's some complexity to this issue around how humans push others out and hold on to others. And so, these are some issues that we have to consider that are real, because we are moving at light speed into science and technology, and we cannot afford, if we want to think about competitiveness now, as opposed to a moral reason or the right reason, to not rob one of his aspirations, hopes, dreams. But we, the young people that we have now, of all stripes, they may be ready for a different world than the gatekeepers, the status quo keepers. Still can't give up, you see.
Mhm.
And so, but we need them, because science is not taking a back step or a stage a step. It's out there leading now. And so we need every person, every brain out there to contribute to what we're going to be able to do to mitigate, turn around, or slow down, or whatever this thing called climate change. We need everyone. And I can't understand why these yahoos who are in leadership positions now, in positions of authority and of power, cannot find the courage, the wisdom, the understanding, the fortitude to do the right thing and move out of the way and move these barriers from wholesale critical masses of people coming into the systems now. You see, that's my thinking.
Whew. Dr. Jill just always dropping the knowledge on us, wisdom. I think
No,
this,
those are my thoughts. Yeah.
well, your thoughts are welcomed and always thought-provoking, and always make me want to get up and do something immediately. I appreciate your words, Dr. J. I think this is a good segue into our second question, which is, so how do we increase diversity in STEM? So let's take a moment and hear what our people on the street have to say about that.
So I think family is the basis of creating these opportunities for people of color. If you have good family support, if you have people that telling you you can do this and you can get to where you want to, I think that starts the basis of making areas where we don't see ourselves in kind of moving along. To have classrooms filled with Black and brown students who are interested in STEM makes a big difference. Having teachers that are willing to see and recognize a student who just might be interested in a sci-fi book, and you could tell them, hey, what was something that you found interesting? And if they say like a UFO, then what part of that can I get you into? Can I get you into the engineering aspect of maybe creating a vehicle that flies? Or could I get you into the physical aspect of how that vehicle relies on the environment around them? And I think starting at home is a very good basis of tackling just diversity in general. I also think that creating programs is essential. Anji has done a very good job on creating this environment which we can all come together. And while, yes, we share like ideas, we're from very far, few, and in between backgrounds where we can bounce ideas off of each other and it's not stagnant. And I think having both community and country and global organizations that help us as African Americans and just people of color in general be brought to the table and be brought to the forefront of the environment makes a whole lot of difference.
It's like a matter of relinquishment of power. And I'm not saying that white people need to step down from their power. I think, white people are also very key to making a better future for these next generations. But what I am saying is that they should be comfortable more with sharing their power and being ready to make some room for others at the top. And I think this includes, especially in STEM, good mentorship, the redevelopment of admissions and hiring policies, the assessment of demographic data, and what your respective departmental or institutional goal is in that kind of area, demographics, putting more money into the development of classes, programs, program material like textbooks, staff especially, and particularly graduate students who are living minimum wage that are really struggling to kind of meet ends way, especially as they continue to pursue a career that's at the moment not rewarding for people of color or for women. And lastly, I think a lot of emphasis and attention on engaging younger kids of underrepresented backgrounds. And maybe that includes lab tours, nature walks, zoos, aquariums, museums, community gardens, really just anything that can engage with the younger audience and really attract them to STEM. I think that's something that's very key and something that a lot of these academic institutions, I don't want to say fail, but lack.
Well, this has been a fantastically lively conversation, and we just heard from our people on the street answering the question, so what do? How do we increase diversity in STEM? And something Gabriel said actually ties in very well with something that you said, Dr. J, about the people at the top, the white people at the top, people in power, need to move out of the way and bring others up so that they can be in those positions. But it's making room for other people, and how uncomfortable that is for some people to have to share that power or to share that privilege or to share just that space. And so I don't know if we want to dive into that a bit, or if we want to move in a different direction. But I just thought that was really interesting that, that's.
Well, I would like to say, just respond to that a little bit. And here again, there are different dimensions to it. But, and it is indeed critical that people in the top positions, in the leadership positions, in the positions with power, either do the job or get out of the way so that someone can do the job that has the courage to do it. However, I feel too that the probably as severe problem is the middle also, particularly if you look at how government is structured or how the institutions are structured with the faculties. Those middles are given an awful lot of power, and they're the ones who hang around a long, long time and create the drag, you see. And so it becomes opaque, and they're part of the problem also, a big part of the problem. And what I see also, you have the persons who are brought in, whether it's the president, the CEO, the executive position, or if it's the dean or the provost, or it's the division chief, or the head of NOAA or whatever, the SESer. You have those people, and they should be held accountable. And what I'm concerned also is that you have the workspace, but where do you establish accountability and follow through on that accountability? And so if you have diversity plans, equity, inclusion, welcoming plans. Who is there to make sure that those plans are carried out? Now, I understand that part of the problem too is sometimes you're laying a new way of seeing, doing, and shine on something that's old and rusty. And so these systems, these structures that we have in place are part of the problem also, in the sense that you can't just keep trying to put a Band-Aid on it over here, bandage it up over here, put some glue on it here, put some putty here in it, and think, well, okay, now you have a system that you can carry out these goals and objectives. No, you gotta get rid of this system, because the system, the structure is the problem, you see. It's a problem. And it is also a way of people hiding behind it and feeling safe if they play by the rules in those systems, you see.
Yeah, when I think about it, I also think about it being a holistic approach. So if we think about like an academic institution, the leadership can set this, they can set the policy, they can set the tone, that people below them are supposed to follow. But when you think about the day-to-day and the actual activities and the students that work in labs or the administrators that are hired, like you said, that happens at the middle. That's the professors and the middle management that actually manages that day-to-day. They're the ones who are going to be recruiting for students for the programs. They're the ones going to be reviewing applications for the program. So like you said, it's just as important for those people to change the systems and the structures as it is for the leadership. It's got to be top down, but can't be lost in the middle. The middle
They
is
have the power to hire, and they're the ones
right in
who
the middle.
saying who comes in and who doesn't, and who gets a promotion and who doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think, Catalina?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely, right? So what I'm hearing in the more kind of big picture sense is the need for turnover, obviously, in the power structure, in the areas where people have influence and control. And that's scary, right? Sharing power is terrifying if you've been benefiting from that particular deeply entrenched power structure for so long. And also the need to shift, our value systems, because as we were talking about during kind of the break, you can easily check the boxes with, really with endeavors that have no real intention of making a difference. But unless you're going to shift the value structure and bring these diversity, equity, inclusion, access, justice, efforts into an equitable space with everything else we do in these STEM, institutions, you're never going to shift the mindsets of the gatekeepers, because the gatekeepers are going to take time to turn over, right? So I can come in, people like us can come in and flag the barriers in their policies, their procedures, and their practices all day long, but they can still implement them in a biased manner if they're not also shifting the gatekeepers over, the mindsets of those who are making the decisions, the power structure, like you're saying. But we have to simultaneously consider, what are we ready to totally disrupt, right? Where's the true structural and systemic change going to come? And which spheres of influence and power are going to have to be reimagined for this? And, that's why I always feel that, we are sort of the wedges in the door, but our job, which is what PEPS does so beautifully, is to help, that next generation climb over our backs, because we have to get them to positions of influence, leadership, and power to simultaneously tackle the bad actors, as we're talking about, but to shift the culture, they also have to reimagine a way forward. And as you started this conversation, Ambrose, diversity is essential for good science, right? And so we know that the face of America is changing, and that US, marginalized and minoritized groups are the reason for that, right? We know that our communities are changing the face of this country, but the face of, STEM in this country, as Ambrose has been around long enough to see himself, is not changing. If anything, the areas where we've maybe had made a little bit of progress at some point through particular initiatives is now falling short even further.
And
So,
I think that, to answer this, how are we going to change things? It's a big thought, but it's part of the crisis that we are in right now. And that is, we have all of these years where we have denied a proper, a good, a solid education to boys and girls of color. And we are not gonna come up, I don't think, with the numbers, and not just for numbers' sake, but we're not gonna change things as rapidly as we could if we do not find a way to, in a massive way, turn our education system around, starting at pre-K and all the way through secondary school. In the sense that we have both with formal education and informal education that takes place in one's life by the time they get to the college level. And I think there's thinking out there right now, are colleges and universities going to have the same place 20 years, 30, 40 years from now that they have now? Or will there be other ways of credentialing, qualifying one's skill set, toolbox, so to say, to be able to contribute to science and technology? And so we need a wholesale, a radical, a transformative approach and act or impact to get our boys and girls right now with access and the proper education and skills building that they need, you see. Otherwise, you and I going to still be the magicians that we've been, to know where there are pockets and populations out there to go and tap that others haven't known to go to, or won't go to, or can't go to, or whatever. And we can still look good, you see. And we know they're out there, but they're just thousands and thousands, millions more that are there also, but need the proper intervention. And so how are we going to change this? We need a drastic waterfront change in terms of the numbers of people that are coming through the education system with the skill sets to build on their interests for a better world, you see. And so I think that's certainly one of the things that we have to do. We have to certainly get to the point where leadership in the government or in academia or in private industry, NGOs or whatever, are going to have to understand the benefit of those higher education institutions that we already have in place and that are credentialed, like our historically Black colleges and universities, our tribal colleges, our other minority serving institution, Hispanic serving institution, Asian serving institutions. I think we heard from Dr. Taylor examples of why we have to give up thinking that only expertise, excellence, lies in the Ivy League or the flagship university or the well-heeled small private institutions. And so there are places that we still need to go and open the doors to and embrace as bona fide collaborators, partners, collaborators. We get to change the rules together. We get to go after the resources together as we define them together. There's no power competition here. I'm big, I'm all of this. So therefore, this relationship is a power base. We're meeting as equals, you see. So I think those are some of the kinds of things that we need to do in a big way, a big way, if we really want to be ready for where science and technology is going and have everyone contributing that could offer so much to it. Because another thing is, you look at how much money is spent to hold these groups down. It's trillions of dollars, trillions, to subjugate people, to oppress people.
Ambrose, I want to pick up on what you were saying about the need for radical change, metamorphosis in the educational system. I was watching, first of all, I was thinking about my own education as a young boy growing up in the South. You and I share North Carolina's home states, and it was during the time when NASA was coming online and the space program was really big, and John Glenn and all that. And I remember saying to my teachers when I was in elementary school, I want to become an aeronautical engineer. Now, I did not know what an aeronautical engineer was, but I had learned from hearing news reports or something that was someone that worked on the space program, right? Not one teacher ever embraced that with me and ever encouraged me and to say, yeah, you can be an aeronautical engineer, right? And so I think about, when we think about students today, how many of them are also not being encouraged, not being celebrated. That was a report on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, August 2nd edition that I saw, where there was a gentleman, I forgot what state it was in, but 15 years ago, he decided to provide to the school children that were riding the bus 2 hours each way to and from school. So this was in a rural community. These young children in kindergarten, first grade and above, were riding the bus 2 hours each way to and from school, right? And for 15 years, NBC has been tracking what he did with them. And what he did was he gave all of the students on those buses computers.
Okay.
And started to introduce them to science. And so 15 years later, you now see some of these students working in labs, science labs, these students going to colleges and universities and majoring in biology and chemistry and all the different sciences. And I was like, yeah, why not? That's, picking up on your idea, radical idea, equip these children on the bus with the tools that they need to learn, and they can matriculate and they can be successful contributing members. And then I'll share one last personal experience. When I was admitted to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, I was admitted as a probationary student, right? And I remember going to the admissions office and the assistant admissions director saying to my father and me, Mr. Mebane, speaking to my father, Mr. Mebane, don't be surprised when your son flunks out of a school, don't be surprised when he flunks out. Not if he flunks out, but when he flunks out, right? Well, on the way home, my dad didn't say a word to me in the car, but he gave me that look, and that look was, "You better not flunk out." Right?
Yeah.
And to his credit, I was dean's list my first semester. I was dean's list my second semester. I goofed off my sophomore year a little bit, so I had to get back on this dean's list. But the point is, the expectation was that, oh, you can't do it. You can't handle it. You know, so we're not going to invest in you because you can't do the work. And that kind of discouragement, continues today. You know.
Well,
Yeah, and Will, to me, your story, probably 99, 97% of people of color, men and women, boys and girls, can tell the same or have a similar story to tell
Yep.
about someone standing in the way or not believing them or not supporting them to have confidence in themselves. And yeah, and I have my stories, you see. We all do. But it we still have the status quo that they can hear those stories, but they're not willing to get off the dime and change their way of living. Something totally off of the subject here. I looked at Eugene Robinson's piece on Bill Russell and the show. And I said, how many times will we have to read a piece like that or an obituary of accomplished individuals like Bill Russell, you, all of us? And there has to be thrown in there, and it should be put in there. Yet, this is what they had to survive. One, not being able to, with all that he was doing and could do and brought to galvanizing Boston or New England around the Celtics, he still had to confront raw racism, raw in-your-face violence from people. He and his family had to go, left, whether it was overnight, over weekend, week, or whatever, to come home to a house with racial epithets and graffiti written all over the walls, feces in the bed. And you talk to the average person of color, the average Black person, they have experienced this, you see, or similar. And that is the violence that we have lived with, our forefathers and parents lived with, and we continue to live with in this country. And all of that creates that psychological violence that I'm talking about for our boys and girls who are trying to contemplate, how do I get along in this world with everyone? And how do I escape, no matter what I want to do or how well I'm doing or how well behaved I am? Those individuals who want to focus on my Blackness or my brownness or my whatever, but often without good intentions, you see. And that is part of what we're dealing with. So when we're talking about how are we going to increase our participation, diversify the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, all of these life living, day-to-day experiences are what we have to contend with. And somebody's got to help move those out of the way, you
Mhm.
see. And because our boys and girls are having to, or get to then compete with individuals who do not have these obstacles in their way. Doesn't mean they don't have some trials and tribulations that we humans have, but they don't have that extra added intentional violence, whether physical or psychologically, imposed on them. And that's what our boys and girls are dealing with. They're dealing with it from the time they get out of their beds, however they traverse from the school, from the home to the school, and once they get to the school. And it isn't just from their playmates that can be naughty, as kids can be. It's from their teachers and from their administrators also, and from the school boards, and from the board of trustees, the overseers who maintain these policies and procedures and operations and administrations of the status quo.
I hate that we need to wrap this up soon because I feel like we could continue this conversation. Dr. Jearld, everything you said resonates. Reverend Will, your story unfortunately resonates. I've got a very similar one. But before we wrap up, I want to ask Catalina if you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us before we wrap up today.
Whew. You know,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be an act of resistance to get to these spaces or to persist in these spaces, but it is. And so, you know, because I like to speak to, you know, our scholars, our students of color who tend to watch our programs, speaking directly to them, you know, I know this all sounds intractable, right? And impossible. Never limit your vision of who you can become or where you belong based on what you see around you today, right? I believe critical mass makes a difference. And, you know, I mean it when I say that in our jobs at this point are to be the wedge in the door. You know, we continue to do the work to help amplify your voices and bring you forward. You have to climb over our backs and get to your positions of leadership, influence, and power to help shift this culture. But you need to build community to do that. And this is what we have together. You know, when I look at you all, I'm just so full of gratitude for that, because my community is my superpower. You know, that superpower of resilience, persistence, learning to navigate these obstacles and turn them into detours instead of outright barriers. That comes from your community of support, the people you collect along the way, those who champion you along the way. And to me, that's the superpower of resilience, is your people.
I'd say amen to that. Amen to that. Well, I really want to thank you, Catalina, and thank you, Dr. J, for joining us today for this timely and important conversation. As always, Rev, it's been a pleasure to see you and to speak with you and to hear what you have to say. And thanks to Deb and Alan at FCTV for continuing to co-produce, co-manage, and just work on this wonderful show with us. We are very grateful to FCTV for hosting this. So until next time, everyone, thank you and hope to see you on the next conversation.
Thank you so much.
Here's to the future.